Hello, and thank you for watching this video or listening to this conversation. My name is Alessandra Saviotti. I'm a curator, educator, and I'm currently busy with a PhD at the Liverpool John Moores University. And I am the toolkit editor for Decentralizing Political Economies. So today I'm delighted to be here with Christian Bernds, former curator and head of collections at the Van Abbe Museum in Eindhoven, and Liane Green, curator of modern and contemporary art at the Whitworth in Manchester. So thank you very much for being here with me today. I invited Christian and Liane because we were all involved in a long process which enabled both museums to acquire the Arte Utile archive, or better, to work on literally changing the praxis from acquisition to usership, let's say, in respect to this particular project. So in 2017, a small group of committed members at the Association d'Arte Utile started a collective writing process after an invitation from theorist Stephen Wright, who proposed initially this challenge to Alexandre Bon, who is the director of FRAC Poitou-Charentes, in France. That was the first institution to sign and therefore commit to support the association through what became the Certificate of Usership. So I would say that the first challenge for the group was to resolve with precision what is being acquired when we talk about the Arte Utile archive, because of course it's freely available to usership at no charge via its website. So the first aspect to reconsider was actually to persuade collecting institutions such as museums, for example, to commit to a gesture of support and therefore become a sort of shareholders investing in the project. So we started with a tech spec of the Arte Utile archive, and eventually, after many months, we borrowed some legal language to formalize the Certificate of Usership. And then, of course, from the very exciting writing process, we needed to make the institutions excited also to commit for real and to join, let's say, this group of people committed to usership. So from the merely conceptual level of reimagining how museums could support a project which is constantly in motion and also implies many, many different levels of engagement, we needed to understand really how to do this. And at that very moment, Liane and Christian were really central in making all of this happen. So again, thank you very much for being here with me today. I would like to ask you to perhaps introduce yourself a little bit first, and then we can proceed with the first question, which would be, what was the biggest challenge in formalizing the process within your institutions?
Yeah, shall I go first?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So my name is Liane Green and I'm curator of modern and contemporary art at the Whitworth. And I was, as Alessandra said, responsible for acquiring the archive for the Whitworth collection. And I'm currently working on displaying it in what will be our Office of Useful Art. Yeah, so kind of to begin with your question, Alessandra, on what was the biggest challenge. There were a number of challenges when it came to bringing the Arte Utile archive into the collection at the Whitworth. And I think to begin, it's probably worth thinking about what you just said in your introduction, I guess, in about the challenges that the group had with resolving what the archive is and how you would go about convincing museums and galleries to kind of commit to buying a work that is essentially free and available to use already online. And I guess in many ways, the Arte Utile archive is really different to anything that we've ever acquired at the museum. And as a museum, we also have very strict policies and procedures that are perhaps more easily adapted to more traditional forms of art. And by that, I guess I mean like finite objects rather than what the Arte Utile archive is, which is more of an open-ended, project-based or social process that changes and extends over time. And within collecting in museums, this is something that's definitely been changing over the past 20 years or so, that we've been shifting the way in which we collect work and the kind of work that we're collecting as artistic practice has shifted. Galleries have started to collect performance, installation, time-based media, and all of these have presented challenges, but I think practices in kind of collections management and policies around acquisitions are still catching up with those changes in artistic practice. And so the Arte Utile archive definitely presented a particular challenge. First, we kind of had many discussions in-house about why we would acquire a work and purchase a work that we could get for free, and the ethics around that. And what helped with this, I think, was really almost conceiving of the archive as a conceptual work of art, right? Because what we were acquiring in many ways was a network of ideas. And our reason for bringing it into the collection was that kind of in a museum, the collection really sits at the heart of all of our activities. It's in many ways, it's why we're there. You know, that's one of our kind of first priorities, is taking care of and growing a collection. And it also acts as a way to kind of, the collection is the thing that connects and acts as the catalyst for all of our programming activities. Everything we do always comes back to the collection. And so in buying the Arte Utile archive, we were really supporting and buying into the ethos of Arte Utile. Because as you know, when you purchase the archive, the funds are used to kind of go back into the project of Arte Utile to support the running of the database, to activate new projects. So we were really asking ourselves a lot of questions about why we were collecting it. So why not just display or subscribe or just be a using member of the association? Why acquire it? What was that doing for the Whitworth? And I think that really came down to our interest in the transformative and operational change that could be offered by acquiring the Arte Utile archive. It's worth noting that at the point of acquiring the archive, this was the time when Alistair Hudson became director of the Whitworth. And so as a gallery, we were really reconceiving ourselves. We were writing our new mission and vision. We were being led by a more socially engaged agenda. We were seeking to become a constituent museum. And yet that's a term that's been coined by an international group of museums called L'Internazionale, who kind of describe a constituent museum as one that puts relationships at the centre of their operations. And so that's what we were hoping acquiring the Arte Utile archive would contribute to at the museum, in bringing in the archive, which was this kind of network of socially engaged artistic projects and ideas. In bringing this into the collection, we were kind of bringing those relationships into the centre of our activities, and we were making a long-term commitment to the constituent museum model, because, you know, as you know, when you acquire something for the collection, you're acquiring it in perpetuity. You know, you're saying this is going to be part of our museum forever. And so the point of bringing the archive into the collection was really kind of about institutionalising the work, and in turn having it act as a catalyst for changing our operations internally. And that's happened in kind of lots of tangible and intangible ways. And I'm aware I've been speaking for a little while now, so I'll let Christiane have an opportunity to speak, and perhaps we can come back to some of those in the conversation as it progresses.
Sure, thanks.
Well, Leon, this is a beautiful story, and it parallels the process at Van Abbe Museum. I'm curator and head of collections at the Van Abbe since 1997. At the moment, I'm in this in-between zone, preparing my retirement, end of the year. As responsible for the acquisition procedures, for me, the acquisition of the Arte Utile archive was super interesting. I'm very interested in museology and in the changes within the museum institutions according to the needs of time. Of course, there are a lot of aspects that influence these changes within or urge the institutions to change, although the change sometimes goes very slowly. You can think about the acquisition of performances and conceptual art. Liana already mentioned that, how that changed the procedures and the processes within the institution, and also the thinking about what exactly is the artwork that you bring in. For me personally, it's also very important to think about the responsibility of the institution. What kind of responsibility do you take on when you acquire an artwork? And for Arte Utile, this was really a big question. What exactly do we acquire? Besides of all the other questions that Leanne also addressed. For me, it was also, I was very involved in the how you say, in the shaping of the certificate and the acquisition contract. And for me, it was important in a way to bridge basically the language of the institution, the procedures and processes, with the ideals that were within Arte Utile, that were and this was important in order to, in a way, bring in the certificate and acquisition contract in order to make it possible to change the thinking about what is it to acquire and what is it exactly to have this responsibility. So I hoped it could be a kind of catalyzer, is that the right word? Mm-hmm. To make the museum rethink a lot of its processes. And therefore it was important that the language of the contract was precise. And that in order to be able to be this catalyzer. And I think we are all only at the moment in the beginning of the influence of the Arte Utile for the institution. You could say, okay, institutions are slow. On the other hand, slow but sure. Slowly but surely. So it's better to take more time and really change something as to make it a kind of trendy thing that comes in and then disappears somewhere. And I think it's really the beginning, because I think there is a lot of conversation that still needs to be held about this change of specific how you say, notions and words and definitions that we use in the museum. And to mention one is, for instance, the conservation of artworks and the budget for conservation of artworks. Because this, we have an idea of what conservation means, and there is a budget for, but for Arte Utile, we really have to rethink this whole notion of conservation. And for me, this is a very interesting and basically also opening up and mind-blowing thinking process. And we are, as I said, we are only in the beginning of rethinking.
Yeah. No, I agree. Also, for me, it was quite interesting to like make this exercise all the time. How do we literally choose the right word to say what we want to say? And then, of course, I think all the idea of working a lot on language and on definition is pretty much part of how the association is really try to push forward this idea of Arte Utile, and like starting from the definition itself that Tanya really wants to maintain the definition in Spanish, because if you translate Arte Utile, for instance, in useful art, it loses a little bit the idea that art can be used as a tool for change rather than art is useful or useless. So like this constant exercise on really finding the right words, the right sentences to define something that is perhaps new, but at the same time with roots in what happened before in terms of the history of art, and in particular with the history of socially engaged art, it's quite important. So this, I think, thought leads me to the second question, which is precisely about language. So do you think that the certificate of usership somehow was adapted to the pre-existing legal framework of collecting in terms of language, or was it the other way around?
I think for me, it was a bit of a mix. And this was something that I think, as you said, when we were all really involved in kind of working on the certificate of usership and shifting some of the language to enable it to be more clear and accessible. This was something we were always coming back to. So as a university museum, the Whitworth has to have all of our contracts checked by the university's legal team before we're allowed to sign anything. And I think there were definitely parts of both the purchase agreement and the certificate of usership that were misunderstood and queried by the legal team. And a lot of this definitely came back to language. For example, I know that they had a lot of trouble with, and they queried a lot the use of the term purchase for this work, because as they understood it in legal terms, we were paying for a subscription to the archive. We were buying the right to be able to use and display the archive rather than owning it. And that was the way, in the legal framework, that was the way in which they could conceive of it, that it was to do with rights of usership rather than ownership. And I think that was where it kind of butted up a bit with terminology in museums and acquiring works of art. And I think as well, the certificate of usership was then changed off the back of that fairly significantly during the process of Van Arbe and the Whitworth acquiring this work. I started to kind of view the purchase agreement as the legal contract, and the certificate of usership as this document that almost gave clarity to what the archive is and what the museum's relationship is to it. As Christiane sort of mentioned, I think, when at the beginning, when we were really thinking like, okay, but what is it that we're actually acquiring for the museum when we get the Arte Utile archive? It was working on the certificate of usership that enabled me to think through what that was. So I started to see, the purchase agreement as something that was very different, and that was like the legal transfer of title or acquisitions contract, and the certificate of usership became something else. I think because we eventually, what we did was we separated it into different clauses that gave details on the different modes of usership for museums. So kind of separated it out into activation, location, context, and presentation and display. And so what changed by the end was that the certificate almost kind of became a user manual for how museums could acquire and use the archive, rather than a kind of legal document in and of itself.
What I was introduced in this process rather lately. I popped in and out several times since 2017, and only at the end I was involved in the conversation about the certificate and the purchase in a very intense way. And one of the things that I noticed was, okay, there is this legal language, and ownership, and to own something is legally described very, very, very precisely. And in a way, this description goes against the whole idea of arte utile. So then how to deal with that? Should we try to find another word? But then you very easily slide into a direction, for instance, of a subscription, which would be a pity to use that, because then you immediately enter into another category and domain. And the idea was, or my kind of ambition was, to use the language in a way that would fit into the legal language, but not totally. And I remember Leanna and I, we had a conversation or a correspondence about specific definitions to use in the contract. For instance, the user and spectator, author, initiator, creator. What are the specific roles of all the people involved? And it was very difficult to find the right description. We had a lot of very precise conversations about, but if you choose that, then you will in a way freeze the power that is in the contract. And okay, at a certain moment we agreed to specific words. I think the ones in the Van Abbe contract might be slightly different from the ones even in the with word, because we made there a small step again. And I can imagine that in future there will be discussions again, and definitions will be changed, words will be changed, the language will be changed, and that I think that would be good.
No, it's definitely super fascinating to think about this idea of language, because I'm not sure if there is you Christiane translated the contract also in Dutch, or is just in English?
No, it's just in English.
It's just in English. But I guess the more we think about this, and hopefully more institutions in different in different places in the world would try to commit with this idea of the certificate of usership, the value of the translation or the value of the language, not just from this idea that we have about the association, the arte utile, but also how you really make this understandable and valuable in terms of legal contract is super fascinating. And I think that, if we are still here talking about this, is quite interesting, because it has been almost 4 years now. So, and still things are unresolved. So I think it's quite nice to think about this as an open process. And I was thinking that in a way, you already mentioned it a little bit, but perhaps I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the fact that both of your institutions are already committed in thinking and looking at different possibilities to engage with art, not just purchasing social engaged art practices, but supporting more than purchasing. For example, supporting this kind of practices, artists and communities beyond the wall of the museums. So what do you think that the certificate of usership means at this point, that the institution are already committed to support different kind of things? So do you think that with the certificate of usership something would change a little bit, or do you have any thought about that?
I think that the certificate of usership itself can't do anything to shift the way that a museum operates. It can only act as the toolkit for explaining how the archive can be used to do that task. So, for example, there is a section in the certificate on the activation of the archive, and it very clearly sets out the ways in which the archive should be displayed and used by the museum, that it's operational rather than representational, that reactivations of projects should be on a one-to-one scale and involve local contexts and local constituents, The host museums should do call outs for projects in their area, so that they can contribute to keeping the archive growing, so that new projects can be added. And it also kind of sets out the ways in which the Arte Utile Association can provide support on all of that. So for example, with connecting museums with artists who are represented in the archive. So I think for me, I definitely approached collaborating on reworking the certificate so that it would become a useful tool for very clearly explaining to users or other museum curators the ways in which the archive should be displayed and activated. And again, this sort of came back to language. I think some of the changes that were made to the certificate were always just about adapting the language and format to make it more accessible to people who aren't that familiar with Arte Utile, and to help them to kind of very clearly understand what that was all about. And I think this came from, you know, the very early days of us talking about acquiring the Arte Utile archive within the Whitworth, because I felt like I was constantly explaining to people what it was and why we were acquiring it. Like, this question was coming up all the time, and it was clear to me that the reason, you know, the reason that question was coming up all the time was because there was something in the communication. There was kind of a breakdown in that people weren't understanding what it was, what it would do, and why we would acquire it. And so I think the Certificate of Usership in particular was incredibly helpful with that. And then I think already, you know, I think I really liked what Christiane said. I wrote that down actually, about museums being slow but sure. I love that phrase. But I think already we're starting to see some of the tangible and intangible ways at the Whitworth that acquiring the archive is shifting our operations. So for example, off the back of deciding to acquire the archive, we partnered with Van Arbe Museum to seek funding from Outset to transform the operations of both museums. We both created new roles of constituent curators whose purpose was really to lead on those transformations. We've set up a new space at the Whitworth. We've set up an Office of Useful Art that will house the Arte Utile archive, and that will be a space for reactivating projects from the archive. So I think already we're starting to see some of the ways that it can enable us to kind of transform our operations internally and act as this catalyst for the way that we operate as a museum. But hopefully there will be kind of, we'll see those changes expand and shift over the longer term as well. And coming back specifically to the Certificate of Usership, I guess, like Christiane, I hope that that goes on. You know, I think there are, you know, even looking back, I think it was really interesting when you asked us to do this in conversation. And I was kind of looking back over my notes and my correspondence with you both from that time. And even now I can see things that I would kind of change or add into the certificate. So yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. I like what you say, what you said, Leanne, about that you had to explain the certificate. And that made me think of the fact that actually the certificate works as a kind of artwork. Mm-hmm. You always, people always ask you to explain the artwork. And the explanations will change in time, depending on a lot of circumstances. I see basically the certificate as a kind of gift for the museum that the museum can use in order to constantly explain and rethink, and use as a mirror for its functioning and the way it conceives of the institution. However, I also see a kind of dangers, and that is the Arte Utile project really needs a lot of conservation, and conservation in a more contemporary meaning of the word. and that is exactly this keeping the art utile alive instead of conserving it in a specific condition. You have to keep it alive, you have to activate it, you have to use it, you have to rethink it. And it's important for the institutions, and Liana was talking about the Withword, and they already work on it, like giving it a space, and making sure that there is staff that has time to invest in the activation of the archive and the project. And this is something that Van Abbe is also trying to do, but it is really a challenge. It is a challenge to really, you constantly have to invest in it, and you have to enable people to that are enthusiastic and that want to work with it, to invest in it and to spend time on it. And this is a new way of conserving. So I was addressing this topic in the museum, like we need to use our budget for conservation in a different way. Maybe we need an activator instead of a restorer in the museum. And so these kind of conversations this is one of the ways in which the Art Utile project changes the institution. So why don't we have activators for works? Another thing is that I really think that we need to think in the direction of collecting relationships, also in terms of invest in the exchange within institutions that purchased the Art Utile archive. So I would really love to have this kind of the possibility to also work with FRAC, for instance. Like, how do they work with the Art Utile archive? What do they do with it? What can we learn from each other? How can we make each other enthusiastic? How can we develop further there? How can we even support the new institutions, other institutions that want to acquire the Art Utile archive with the knowledge and the expertise that we already have, experience we already have in this process. And I think these are very important directions, both within and outside of the museum, to keep the idea of Art Utile alive.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd like to come back to that really quickly, actually, if that's okay, just because it's a really good point. That this investing in this exchange between museums that are acquiring it, I think, is something that would be hugely beneficial for other institutions who wish to purchase the archive going forward. Because in those early days, as I kind of said, when people were constantly asking me, well, what is it? What are you acquiring? All of these questions were coming from a very institutional viewpoint. They were coming from other museum professionals. And then we were really lucky because we had access to the association. So we were able to ask a lot of these questions. But at the same time, I think the association were almost like deep in it with Art Utile, like you knew so much already that I think explaining from the very kind of beginning in the simplest senses was tricky. And I think sometimes those explanations weren't coming from a place of people who are working within institutions. So the questions that were coming up around conservation, collections management, the paperwork, I think that's the stuff that that I found most difficult to work on as a curator. And I think going forward, and I'd happily be involved in this, having that more of that kind of peer-to-peer support from an institutional perspective would be one way of enabling the archive to be kept alive and to grow and be acquired by other institutions. And I also wanted to come back on another one of Christiane's points, because this was this was the point that I was thinking about when I was thinking, okay, what else would we do on the certificate of usership? What would we add to it next time? And I think that kind of practical side of acquiring the work, of thinking about conservation, was something that I think we could have grown a bit more now as I look back. And I know, Christiane, you were definitely bringing up this point from the very beginning of us working together on the Certificate of Usership. And we had conversations around how we can kind of ensure the integrity and the reliability of the database in the face of changing technologies. At some point, it might not be updated anymore. So those questions around kind of, well, who has responsibility of paying for the web domain? Who's got responsibility for ensuring the upkeep of the site, of the design, to ensure it still works on different kinds of, you know, on phones, on iPads. And I think that's something that we still need to work on a little bit more. Yeah, I like this idea that you said that you put forward of the activator rather than the conservator, Christiane. I think that's a lovely idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it opens really, like, this conversation opens up really different layers of thinking about how to be really serious on maintaining this work and this body of work. But I think it also unpacks different levels of, you know, like collaboration, but also really solidarity, right? And also redistribution. How do we redistribute eventually the money that are coming in from the purchase of the archive, or like for the committing to the certificate of usership, which is quite interesting to think about, especially now that everything has been shifting online. But we have been working with this idea of creating this sort of digital platform, but to intervene quite locally, using the archive and their practices that are included into the archive, to first of all broaden the effect of that, but also to getting to know more projects in different places, how they work, how these artists navigate their collaboration with the communities, etc., etc. So perhaps this conversation is the first of many, hopefully. And I just have like a very last question, and I think I'm super happy with what we have been discussed so far. But I was thinking that at a certain point in the almost 2 years email exchange that we had, we got to the point where someone wrote, and I think it was you, Christiane, but I might be wrong, but there was this sentence, like, the financial part is a translation of this vision into practice. And it was kind of enlightening for me, because I got to think about the difference between investment and speculation. And I couldn't place the certificate of usership in any of these categories, in respect also to what you were saying before, that the idea of collecting is collecting forever. Like, there is something that it should be preserved, you know, like forever, also beyond the human beings. So do you have any thought in respect to this, thinking about what it means for a collection to operate within either these terms, like it's more investment or it's more speculation? And where do you see the certificate of usership in these two definitions?
I think in terms of speculation, there was definitely a strong speculative component to acquiring the archive. And I think in particular, because we were some of the first museums to do so. So it was something that was completely new. We were both collecting in a way that we hadn't collected before, and we were investing significant time, resources, and funds into doing it with this element of unknowing, really, because we were there shaping it. But I think for me, that kind of unknowing is countered by the understanding that I got from the whole process, which was that I guess that the museum needs to put in the work in order to get the rewards. So if you're thinking about investment in terms of kind of investing and getting returns. The museum needs to invest time and resources in order to be able to get the maximum returns from this work of art. So if you're acquiring the archive in a way that you might acquire something more traditionally as something that's kind of just representative, perhaps to be displayed but not activated, then it is a failure. You've speculated and you've kind of lost out, I guess. But if the archive is used according to the Certificate of Usership, so if it's a catalyst for activating projects within a local context, for engaging constituents, for growing relationships, if the museum contributes to keeping the archive alive with local call-outs for projects, making it relevant in their own locality and context, then you're going to kind of reap the rewards of that speculation. So those are kind of the ways in which I thought about the archive and the Certificate of Usership within the context of speculation and investment.
Yeah, I really like how you describe it, Leanne. And I was thinking these words, these notions, investment and speculation, they come from finance, huh? From the world of money. So if we would use the description, your description, Leanne, and translate that to the world of finance, I was thinking, what would that mean for the financial world, to think about investment as work instead of putting money in, and speculation as specific ideals for the future. How would that work? And that's one of the things that I like a lot of the Art Utile project, that what if you translate the way we think and work and reschedule and reuse around Art Utile, and use that for other artworks and for other disciplines and for other domains. What could that bring into motion? And I think that's what interests me a lot.
Indeed. All right.
Unfortunately, Alessandra, it was not me who who brought up this.
Okay. So I have to check it better, because of course when I was preparing the conversation and the interview, I was reading all the emails, so somehow I might be lost. But I really like this this idea, and I think that it is why I also thought about publishing this conversation, on having this conversation in the framework of Decentralizing Political Economies project, because this idea of the financial part is a translation of the vision into practice is actually how economy work in a way or another. So and again, it's part of this process, how we went from imagining a movement, an art movement, which is actually so strong that can impact real life, and how do we put these ideas into words, and then how do we put into practice these ideas? So I think I'm really happy that we had the chance to have this conversation, because it was really great to talk with you about all the process, because we
can I make
ahead.
add one thing, and that is within Van Abbe we had a lot of discussions about what does it mean to bring an artwork in the collection, and we always said, okay, this is transporting an artwork from the world of speculation and finance into the public domain, into the cultural memory. And there this transfer changes the value from a financial value into a cultural value, or for memory. but in the past, it was at least in the Netherlands, it is quite difficult for museums to how you say, to deaccession, that's the word, to deaccession an artwork. But this is changing. This is changing because we talk a lot about the how you say, the collections are growing and growing and growing, and it can't continue because there is limits to the to depot space, etc., etc. And we also, yeah, there are practical reasons to rethink this whole idea of collecting without ever deaccessioning. So what exactly does that mean in terms of also this thinking of bringing an artwork from financial realm into the cultural realm? What does that mean? What are the consequences? And I think we have to be very careful with opening all the doors.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, so but well, thank you very much again for being with me. I guess this is again like food for thoughts, and hopefully this is the first of many other conversations about that. So thank you again, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Alessandra, for making this conversation possible. Thank you, Lianne.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Thank you.
Again.